All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vintage Report's seasonal updates. I hope everyone was able to find us here on the internet. This is the first of our three-part series on the seasonal updates. Today we'll be discussing beyond irrigation, boosting phenolics in times of high crop loads. My name is Mark Anderson. I'm the director of the Vintage Report program, and I'm joined today by none other than Thibaut Scholasch, co-founder of Fruition Sciences. Thibaut is also driving the presentation today. So Thibaut, I'm going to ask you to switch to the next slide. All right, so just looking at the roster of who's attending today, it looks like about 80% of us have probably already attended a Vintage Report conference somewhere on the planet. So I'd like to welcome you back. For those new folks who are joining us today, well, thank you for joining us. And typically what we are as an organization which brings together winemakers, grape growers, scientists, and industry leaders and others to discuss the previous year's harvest in light of recent scientific findings. So the key term there was previous year's harvest. Typically, we are a once-a-year conference in 8 parts of the world, and during our seasonal updates, we are actually going to be looking at pretty much live results from data that we've been collecting around the world. And today we're focusing specifically on Napa and Sonoma counties. So Thibaut, can you go to the next slide? So today's format, of course, it's a webinar, and it's a bit of a dialogue between myself and Thibaut, but really you are playing the biggest role here of everybody. Thibaut knows a lot about growing wine grapes, and so he's going to walk us through his findings and the data that his team has been collecting. And I don't know a lot about growing wine grapes, so I'm going to try and clarify key points as they come up at different intersections throughout the presentation. But I highly encourage you to ask any questions that you may have about the vintage, about what you're seeing in your vineyards, or what you would expect from your wines. And we'll see if we can come up with a data-based response, hopefully an answer, to your question. And again, feel free to ask questions. There is both a chat box and a question box. I think it's to the right of my head here. And yeah, again, feel free to ask all questions. I know that some of our team members from around the world are also going to be stoking us up with some good content as well. Thibaut, can you go to the next slide? Okay, yeah, so we are quickly adapting to our new environment with a lot of challenges, of course, to public health. And yet we're also very excited because we plan to keep the seasonal updates content moving throughout the year. And we have we are planning 2 more seasonal updates this summer. The next one will be on Thursday, July 9th at around 10 a.m. Pacific time. And we're going to be focusing on a pre-veraison update during that session. We also have one on August 13th as well, where we're going to be looking at data in preparation for pre-harvest conditions. So the next 2 seasonal updates are $25 to attend. And there is going to be an automatic email that goes out right after the webinar is over. And you will receive a link to sign up via Eventbrite for the next seasonal updates. And on top of that, you will also receive a recording of today's presentation. So you can feel free to go back and focus on any part of the presentation where you want to get more information. So that's one really cool feature about doing these live webinars that are broadcast throughout the world, is that you can rewatch any of the recordings on your own time. So if you're not available at any of the above mentioned times to see the webinar live, you'll automatically get to access a recording of the event. So that's pretty cool. All right, Thibaut, next slide, please. All right, and then the final note that I'm going to make before we start out our technical presentation is that today's program is brought to us by 360 Vidi. As many of us know, this is the software application that's provided by Fruition Sciences. And it's a method of connecting all relevant vineyard data together in one place so that you and your team can have really accurate analysis of all the sites in your network. So if you are interested in the kind of topics that we're discussing here, we're in the vintage report, we always discuss things on a regional basis. But if you want to see more of these results on a site-specific basis, please get in contact with Fruition Sciences, and they would love to discuss how this technology can work for you, your vineyards, and your wines. All right, so that is the introduction, and without further ado, I will hand it over to Thibaut Scholasch, co-founder of Fruition Sciences.
Thank you, Mark, for this introduction. Today, we titled these first updates, Beyond Irrigation, Boosting Phenolics in Times of High Crop Load. So why did we choose this title? It's essentially in hopes that as we walk through the different analytical results, you'll understand why, at least in Northern California, so far there is a high potential for high phenolics, but also there is, due to last year and the current conditions of the season, a high potential to lose or to jeopardize that potential. So the whole idea is that we all know that starting irrigation too early is known to reduce phenolics, but this year it is different, and we may actually have to start irrigating during the period pre-veraison, but that might be without compromising polyphenols. So essentially, we are going to try to critically look at that claim and see whether or not you see it applicable to your conditions. So as a preliminary context, I would like to explain the principle of the framework within which I'm going to discuss the key climatic variables known to affect plant physiology and food composition. At the very beginning of this analytical work, there is the observation that three segments can be observed in order to characterize three very different stages of plant development. In blue, there is a dormancy phase. In green, there is the phase during which everything is contributing to convert light into carbohydrates. So even the fruit is a source of carbohydrates during that phase. So that phase starts at bud break and ends at veraison. And we only start to get a coexistence of sources of carbohydrates and sinks of carbohydrates, namely the fruit, but also other perennial organs like the trunks or the roots where carbohydrates can be stored during the orange phase. And it's very important to distinguish the green from the orange because once veraison has occurred, there is some fundamental changes that are going to taint how we assess vine health status. So today I will not discuss too much the orange period. It will be for the next session. But let's dive a little bit more into how we can dissect further this framework. So essentially here we see that the vegetative period, the formerly green period, can be subdivided into two parts. One part during which light and heat and nitrogen and water supply are driving the speed at which leaf area develops. I call it period 2. And then a period 3, whose length and duration varies from season to season, which is a period during which abiotic stress are known to impact fruit composition. So depending upon their length, their duration, their severity, different stresses coming from the environment will have a positive or negative impact on fruit composition. And then when the fruit has gone through veraison, there is in a period 4 during which sugar is actively loading. And after that active loading of the sugar period ends, we have a 5th period during which color keeps accumulating per skin area. And this period 5 ends with harvest until the vine enters again in dormancy. So altogether, this is the reason why we segment the season into 5 periods. Here I want to bring your attention to the fact that, in fact, those periods are not necessarily coinciding with phenological stages. The break between period 1 and period 2 is bud break. So here we are looking at phenology. But since bloom is going to happen most of the time while leaf area is growing, bloom isn't going to be the date that's going to slice period 2 and period 3 apart. Actually, the end of period 2 will be when the total leaf area will be developed and we won't observe any further leaf area growth. The period 3 starts, therefore, when the maximum transpiring leaf area has been reached, and it ends when veraison kicks in. Since when veraison kicks in, the fruit is going to degrade its hydraulic relationship with the vine. Technically, we say that the fruit becomes hydraulically buffered from the vine. And this is why the water relationships and the photosynthetic relationship will be very related between the plant and the fruit during that period 3. Once we enter period 4, it's a whole different story. We will first have the sugar actively loading into the berries, and then we will have the color actively accumulating into the skin of the berries. Okay, so a mix of phenology and physiology, what for? Well, it's important because at the end of the day, what we want to get today is an early insight for what's cooking in terms of vineyard production. And for that, a very good insight can be given by looking at the relationship between the duration of the period 2 over the period 3. To exemplify this, if I look at last year, period 2 and period 3, we see that the duration of period 2 was fairly long, more than 90 days. Bloom was after the beginning of June, and the leaf area growth stopped around the end of June, and the veraison was at the end of the first week of August. So essentially, number one, bloom did not coincide with the end of period 2, and we have, relatively speaking, a longer period 2 than a period 3, which I have symbolized here. You see that we had 90 plus calendar days during which the leaf area was developing, and we had 30 calendar days or less during which positive impact of stresses may have been experienced by the plant. This picture is very different if we look at the situation in 2020 in Napa. First of all, the duration of period 2 has been very short compared to last year. Actually, we started to observe the first signs of leaf area growth stops early June, even end of May in some sites, which means that the ratio between the duration of period 2 over period 3 is going to be completely different in 2020. And in my opinion, one of the most important questions to ask this year is, what is this going to cause in terms of fruit composition. The fact that we are looking at a vintage in 2020 where on average period 2 will stretch over 60 to 70 calendar days, while period 3 will stretch over almost a similar amount, slightly less. So while we know that this might be conducive to positive impact for reds, it might not only be positive. And an interesting point would be to try to understand why we observe this shift between period 2 and period 3 by analyzing separately key climatic variables within the framework I just discussed with you. So during period 1, those results here are showing what period 1 looks like when we do a statistical pooling of all the hundreds of weather stations that we have been monitoring here specifically in Napa, but it's a very similar situation in all over Northern California. And what is screaming here at the first site is the green bar is very small, meaning that rain supply was very low. And what does that mean? That means that under drier conditions, we expect lower nitrogen mineralization during the winter. Therefore, when bud breaks kicks in at the onset of period 2, the initial pool of nitrogen readily available for absorption by the roots will be reduced. Then when we move on to period 2, the period starting at bud break and ending when leaf area growth stops, we see a similar picture. You see that the green bar is one of the tiniest if we accept 2015. What does that mean? That means that during period 2, 3 things are really driving the speed of leaf area development. How much heat the plant is experiencing, how much water supply the plant has to its reach, and how much nitrogen. We know nitrogen is low, we know water supply is low, so those conditions are favorable to drive an earlier stop of leaf area development and also to start an earlier onset of water deficit, which means that period 3 will start earlier.
Okay, Thibaut, so let's take a quick breather here and try and understand basically the main points of what you've just said, especially those last 2 slides. So it sounds like what you're saying is that period 1 and period 2 from a rain standpoint are inducing not only an earlier water deficit, but also creating the conditions for the development of a smaller leaf area and a lower ability to assimilate nutrients. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. But we also need to put those observations in balance with how much water demand is imposed to the plant according to A, the size of the leaf area, which directly depends upon how fast the leaf area is growing, and B, what has been the intensity of the climatic demand. So we will do that in a second. If there aren't any questions.
It looks like we don't have any questions quite yet, but I do encourage everyone to ask a couple of questions. I got a few questions submitted to me before the webinar, and one of them that I thought was interesting was from this person who said, I've seen 4 unique heat events this year compared to only 2 last year at this time. What do these earlier, more frequent events mean for my canopy?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. I like to characterize the frequency and intensity of heat event by looking simultaneously at relative humidity and temperature. For that, we have the aggregated index called vapor pressure deficit. So it's measured in kilopascal, and it literally physically describes the intensity of how much water the air is able to pull out away from the canopy. And those early heat events do have a strong impact on, number one, increasing the climatic demand, that is to say, a faster amount of water being lost into the air, but more dangerously, they are related to a plant susceptibility to cavitation. What I mean by that is that every time we have a heat event, what we have to understand is that inside the plant, the water column, the liquid water column that connects the root tips to the leaf-air interface experiences a greater pressure. And the higher is the lack of water in the air combined with warmer temperature, the greater is the tension exerted on this water column. And sometimes when this tension gets very strong, air bubble appears inside the xylem vessels. And when air bubble appears inside the xylem vessels, the first things that disconnects is the hydraulic link between the leaf and the shoots. So the petiole and the leaves gets their vessels embolized. What this means is that those early heat waves in sites where there was some early water limitation may be less of a good fit to reflect how the vine is feeling by measuring the leaves, because from those early heat waves events will cause irreversible damages in terms of hydraulic connection with the rest of the plant. So to me, what does that mean? That means that while we may have a shorter leaf area, it's not even sure that the whole of this leaf area will contribute to the flow of water or to the flow of the photosynthetic activity, in part due to those heat events that might have caused some cavitation, meaning a loss of hydraulic function inside the plant. So those early heat events might bear a very strong footprint for the entire season later on. Does that address the question?
I believe so, yeah. It certainly covers a lot of bases. Thibaut, there's been two additional questions that have been sent in, so maybe we can go through these rather briefly. But one question is looking at drought year models, and I assume is this year that we are seeing similar to 2015 or 2016? Is there any correlation that you could see there?
Big picture, yes, but the problem is that we cannot look at one season without looking at the season before. So we really need to look at two seasons back to back. And 2015 appeared after 2014, which was a very dry year. So because of that, I don't feel very confident to compare 2015 with 2020, because 2015 appeared after a very dry year, 2014, whereas 2020 appeared after a very wet and cold year, 2019. And we know that there is a carryover effect of 2019 onto 2020, for instance, the high crop load. So because of that, I am reluctant to drive an over simple bridge between 15 and...
Okay, so the story is yet to be told. Another good comment and a question was that leaf hue looks a healthy green. So the vine is striking a good balance of nitrogen during its rapid growth this time of year. So how would you interpret this? I assume it's how would you interpret that healthy green color from leaves?
Oh. Okay, yeah, I got the question. So there is an inherent an apparent contradiction between the fact that the lack of rain during period 1 is conducive to a low initial nitrogen pool, but at the same time we see those shiny greeny leaf areas. The thing is, because we also have a lower leaf area development, the fact that there was a lower amount of nitrogen initially is not as apparent, simply because it has not been diluted into a larger biomass, a larger leaf area volume. So if we had the same leaf area development that we had observed in 18, in 19, or in 17, then I believe the nitrogen concentration per leaf area would actually show that it is lower than we expect. But because nitrogen supply works hand in hand with water supply, and because water supply was limited, leaf area size is limited, and therefore the dilution that we should have observed due to the hypothesized reduction in initial nitrogen is not apparent when you look at nitrogen concentration per pestiole. But I was really talking in terms of global amount of nitrogen. So that means that next year, we should expect potentially a lower bud fertility, simply because the vine in total amount will be fed with less nitrogen. But here I'm speculating, and I might be wrong.
All right, so those are two of the questions we've had for now. To the audience, feel free to keep asking us stuff, throwing us curveballs, and we'll see if we can find an answer. So yeah, Thibaut, do you want to move ahead into further analysis?
Yeah. So now that we have looked at how much water is available, let's look at how much heat has been accumulated by the plant. So here you look at one of the way to understand thermal time accumulation using growing degree days with a base 10 degrees Celsius. The green bar is higher than the orange one. So yes, we had more heat accumulation, but still it's less than 17, 16, or 15 over that same period. Why are we interested in looking at that? Simply because growing degree days during period 2 can be understood as a proxy to anticipate the rate of leaf area development. And what this is hinting at when we look at 19 versus 20, but even versus 2018, 2020 is slightly above 2018, is that more leaf area in 2020 has been developed earlier. So this is not to be confused with the observation of an earlier leaf area growth stops. It simply means that during the early stage of the season, more leaf area was intercepting sunlight compared to 19 and 18. Therefore, it means that a higher water use is expected early season because we simply had a greater transpiring leaf area size earlier. So the next question is, okay, I had potentially a greater ability to lose water because I grew faster as a plant, but how much was the weather asking me to spend in terms of water? And for that, we are going to look at the evapotranspiration of reference. Why? Because ET-ref is a way to understand how the daily amount of water used is modulated based on how much light, how much vapor pressure deficit, how much wind speed for a given leaf area size. So in order to understand this a little bit better, we cumulated the climatic demand, here expressed in terms of inches since bud break. And actually the picture is more striking than it first looks. We see again that the green is higher than the orange and higher than the yellow, but in fact, it's not screamingly alerting because we looked at it in terms of inches. And you see that when we convert that into plant units, we typically look at plant water use in terms of millimeter, which I will do in a second. It's a very significant difference. And actually, I'd like to make one pause here because what that means is that we have a double pain. We have, due to growing degree day pattern during period 2, an expectation to see more water use earlier. But here, with a greater climatic demand during period 2, we expect more climatic demand earlier, so double pain. So let's take a closer look at what the situation is. If you look here on the left at the last 4 years and the cumulated ETREF as of today, you see that in 2020, we have reached the highest amount, 350 millimeters of water that we have seen. So it's a 60 millimeter increase compared to 2019, and it's a 10 millimeters increase compared to 2018. What does that mean in terms of vine water use dynamics? If I look at the most striking contrast, the one between 2019 and 2020, we see that in the same time frame, it's almost as if 2 more weeks of vine transpiration had been condensed compared to the same period as we observed in 2019. And it's equivalent to only 3 days compared to 2018, which was the highest year in terms of climatic demand. So this is really important because we should not only look at things in terms of civil calendar, we should also incorporate the fact that while the leaf area was growing faster, while the root water supply was depleted, was reduced earlier, it is also depleted at a faster rate simply because in the same amount of calendar days, the plant is experiencing a greater climatic demand due to the combined effect of early heat waves, more sunny days, more photons blasting on the leaf area.
All right, so Thibaut, let's take a quick break here and review what the main findings of that section were. So in comparison to 2019, due to the climate and canopy size, daily water use has been higher than previous years at an earlier date, right? So this means that the speed at which the root reservoir is depleting itself has been faster. And since the root reservoir was less full than in previous years, this explains why we expect an earlier stop to shoot elongation and an earlier start of period 3. Is that right?
That's exactly it. So that's why I was prefacing this talk with consideration over respective duration of period 2 over period 3, because we know that period 3 is propitious to set the stage to boost the phenolic potential of the fruit. So what is the next question you may ask, Mark, is what does that mean for fruit composition and particularly polyphenols?
Yeah, hoping to hear more about fruit composition, fruit quality, that sort of thing. Can you explain or elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah. Okay, so essentially for that, I'm not going to review the papers and articles. There is an abundance of literature on that. I'd rather leave this talk with a few pointers to better frame and better contextualize the farming strategies that needs to be adjusted to account for the specific conditions of 2020. So let's take one step back, what it is we are seeing so far. First of all, I didn't spend much time on that, but 2019 conditions, because we had a very long period 2, a very high potential for leaf area development, a very high uptake of nitrogen, the production of buds and the formations of bud fertility last year was very favorable to produce more clusters and clusters of a greater size. So we knew even before the start of the bud break in 2020 that we should expect a heavier crop load in 2020, larger cluster size or more cluster per vines. Okay, so that's the carryover effect of 2019. On top of that, point number 2, we have conditions, meaning shorter period 2, longer period 3, which are propitious to produce tinier berries with higher polyphenol potential due to the fact that period 3 will extend over a longer period, therefore more time to stress even the sites that typically have a hard time experiencing even a moderate water deficit. On the flip side of this good outcome is the risk of lack of leaf area. If we don't have enough leaf area, it might be difficult to fully ripen a crop, even if it has a good quality potential. And the second drawback of lacking leaf area is inability from a plant standpoint to protect the fruit from sun exposure during the ripening, and by that ruining the benefits of period 2 and 3 on fruit composition, polyphenol boosting. So what are the different levers we have available? Fertilization. Unlike 2019, it's possible that some sites, gravelly sites, sites with a shallow root system, may indeed experience restriction in nitrogen supply, even if leaf area has been reduced, therefore buffering a little bit this low nitrogen amount effect. So in terms of timing, it's a good thing to know that more efficient applications are observed while nitrogen is actively assimilated and before water deficit sets in. Because we've done for many years measurements of leaf nitrogen concentration non-destructively, we know that we expect the peak of nitrogen accumulation per leaf area to be prior to the peak of leaf transpiring area. That means that this year, since the peak of maximum transpiring leaf area is earlier, the duration of the window during which your fertirrigation will be efficient will also be shorter. So short that it might be that in those sites, your best bet is no longer to try to adjust nitrogen via the root system, but maybe if you've passed that window of active nitrogen accumulation, a more direct band-aid would be to spray nitrogen deficit over the canopy through a foliar application. So that's really important for the rosé and the whites. In terms of canopy size reduction, here the idea is to really focus on sites where water supply is limited late season, but not early season. So we all know of those sites that grew like there is no tomorrow very early during the season, but then the canopy has a tendency to grow too much, too early, and particularly this year in the context of rapid heat accumulation observed during period 2. The risk with that is that when the root reservoir becomes limited in its ability to supply water to the plant, the whole vine may crash. So this is why understanding the amount of water used, and here I'm not talking about water potential, I'm really talking about the actual gallons that are vaporized into the air, is important to guide your canopy strategy. So the idea on those sites where water supply is limited late season but not early season, and where the canopy has a tendency to grow too much, is to reduce leaf area size earlier to keep more water in the root reservoir for later. And by doing so, the benefit is to postpone the timing of your first irrigation with the intent of favoring the increase of polyphenol, which will only be due to water deficit before veraison, and also to stimulate a deeper root growth with the goal in mind to help your vineyard sustaining better drought in future years. So just to give you some hints, based on our measurement on sap flow and how reducing leaf area knocked down the amount of water lost into the atmosphere, it's a good target to know that water savings may be encouraged if you reduce your total leaf area by 10 or 20% of your initial vine leaf area. So here I'm talking hedging the top and hedging the sides, while keeping in mind that we need to ensure that the cluster microclimate will still be there to protect the fruit from late season exposure to the sun. So it's a tricky game because we don't necessarily have a lot of laterals, but maybe those sites, since they grow fast earlier, have been pushing more laterals. So we need to make sure we protect the cluster zone by not hedging too much on the sides, but we can reduce the higher and the height of the canopy. So just an idea I wanted to bring here. So instead of thinking I'm gonna put more water to help the vine using more water, let's do the opposite. I'm gonna reduce the amount of water so that my vine will not use as much water and I won't have to irrigate as much. Another very strong point of this year is to be very attentive to the strategy surrounding the timing and intensity of crop load reduction. On sites where water supply is limited early, there is a risk of having a canopy too small to ripen a large crop load. So here, the goal of crop load reduction will be to reduce the risk of growing vines out of balance. And by that, I mean too small of a canopy with too much fruit, with the expected benefits of improving ripening conditions. And last, what about irrigation? How to adjust irrigation in that context? Here we need to be careful because the water use may decline more rapidly, particularly on those sites that experience no early leaf area growth stops. So the weaker sites, not so much actually. It's a bit counterintuitive, but the high vigor sites might be the one where we may expect some issues during the ripening or during the color accumulation phase just before harvest. Another thing is it's going to be more challenging to rely on the water tension inside the pétiole because of those early heat waves earlier. Simply because the leaf pétiole may be hydraulically isolating the leaf from the rest of the plant. So when you are going to perform your water potential readings, they may be more the reflect of how much moisture is lacking outside in the air, as opposed to how much moisture is lacking from the roots standpoint. So in actuality, you're going to, in fact, measuring the leaf water potential, but it won't be as well connected with the overall vine water status. So the risk here is that you may get a very high amount of false alerts that you may translate into, oh, my potential is very low, it's -15, I need to call on irrigation. But it might be misleading to think in the context of 2020 particularly, that the leaf water potential is directly related to soil moisture availability only. It will always reflect the two deficits, the one combined at the soil level, alongside with the one deficit combined at the leaf-air interface, with a greater contribution of the leaf-air moisture deficit rather than the root soil moisture deficit because of those early heat waves. So make sure that you assess the exact level of soil water stress experienced by the vine, and you do not confuse it with the effect of heat waves on leaf water potential. So this long story to say that, yes, water use decline is desired, particularly to boost polyphenols in red wine. But in the current climatic conditions, we are expecting a higher risk of too severe of a water deficit due to a combination of low soil moisture and an early start of period 3. So we'll spend more days with less water in the root. So the take home is avoid playing with fire, even if you've been confident that you could dry farm your sites for 17, 18, 19. This year, watch the decline of water use or try to anticipate it and prepare to irrigate earlier, simply because the climatic conditions are so different. And I'd like to make a distinction in terms of how to adjust your irrigation strategies based on your production objectives. For white and rosé, in fact, if you haven't observed the leaf area growth stops, you may have a good reason in 2020 to start irrigating while leaf area is setting itself up. in order to boost the leaf area development, which otherwise could be too limited to sustain a larger crop load inherited from 2019. However, for the reds, careful monitoring of the vine water use once you stopped observing the leaf area growth will be even more important than over the last 3 years in 2020. And also be ready to relieve water deficit potentially even before veraison in order to avoid too extreme of water stresses in 2020. So that's all in a nutshell. That was what I wanted to share with you. I hope it made
Bravo,
sense.
Thibaut. Just right on time, 45 minutes, good amount of content. We have a couple of great questions that are coming from the audience. So I wanted to throw those at you. The most recent one was a question on fertilization, but it asked, does fertigation help an early stopped growing canopy to restart growing?
Not necessarily, because the plant's leaf area growth timing is intimately linked to the speed at which thermal time has been experienced by the plant. So leaf area development is extremely sensitive to growing degree days and water and nitrogen during the 300 to 400 first growing degree days. After that, efficiency of your corrections via water or via nitrogen application will be lessened simply because the plant is less ready to convert your additional supply of water or nitrogen into leaf area construction. So that's why it's always recommended to intervene before 400 growing degree days, because that's when you maximize your chance of converting your action into an actual additional amount of leaf area. Once you've gone through around 300, 400 growing degree days, expect the impact of your practice to be lessened. Of course, this has to be mitigated by rootstocks and vine age, but the main idea here is to know that efficiency of those corrections is thermal time dependent, and the efficiency is higher before a certain amount of growing degree day has been reached, and past that prime, it may have only a marginal impact.
Okay. Another question is a bit more specific, but can you advise if canopies are too small in a low, bigger area and clusters are exposed? Should one irrigate early to help promote more shoot growth and promote more shade to the fruit?
Yeah, if you can. But again, I'm concerned that irrigating so late in the season may not have the expected effect on boosting leaf area. You can only boost leaf area with irrigation during period 2. If your goal is to boost leaf area growth and you are already in period 3, the game is over. You will only waste water, but you may only observe some residual leaf area growth. You may help restarting a little bit some secondary growth, but it will be minimum compared to what you would have had earlier. So long story short, I don't expect much benefit from those irrigations during period 3 as far as boosting leaf area growth. No.
And the next question involves you to take out your crystal ball a little bit, because it's asking how would a post-veraison heat spike affect phenolics? And I guess it's asking at this point and what we know of the season.
So clearly, temperatures are bad. And in recent articles, it has been very clearly shown that all the benefits from a moderate water deficit in period 3, a moderate nitrogen deficit in period 3, are negated by a few hours of berries exposure to temperatures that are too high. So the risk is really, really high. We don't need many heat wave days as soon as we get above 35, 36, 37 degrees Celsius on the berry skin, anthocyanins are degrading, and with that are degrading also the cell wall integrity, which will make it more difficult to have the nice combination you expect to get between anthocyanin and tannins later on. So avoid as much as possible these high berry temperature. Maybe this is a year to try kaolinite, like surround. Everything you can do to reduce berry temperature this year will be key, because if you don't have those leaf areas surrounding the clusters to protect it from direct sun exposure, it's going to be hard to keep intact the good polyphenolic potential you are building on right now.
Another question is, are actively growing laterals a good source of carbohydrates?
Yes, they are actually even more efficient than the primary leaf areas, simply because they appear later. So those leaves are hitting their primes in terms of photosynthetic efficiency during the longest days of the year, during which more photons is actually helping photosynthesizing.
Okay,
so yes.
Here's another interesting question. In this year, with limited leaf area, what would be the difference of the impact of crop thinning early, like 3 weeks before raisin, versus crop thinning at the beginning of raisin on fruit quality for red varietals?
Huge. I don't see any justification to postpone any longer cluster thinning. What benefits are you trying to gain by postponing cluster thinning closer to veraison in a year where we are so limited in water supply? So by removing the fruit earlier, you reduce the amount of water lost through the berries transpiration, number one. And also you're getting a better benefit at adjusting the crop load to the smaller leaf area earlier. Near veraison, it's not clear the type of benefits we get in terms of polyphenols. The closer to set, the more easy it has been reported to show benefits in terms of boosting polyphenols. So clearly, I would not postpone cluster thinning. I don't see the benefits expected there, but maybe personally, I don't see what is to gain.
Here's another excellent question. Dry winter and early water deficit favors smaller berries typically. So will the earlier dependency on irrigation boost berry size back to a normal size, also coinciding with higher phenolics?
Usually higher berry size do not coincide with higher phenolics, usually. So to the first part of the question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
Got it.
Yeah. So yeah, you may mitigate the impact of the lack of rain during period 2 and the fact that period 2 will be shorter by irrigating more during period 2. And the benefits will be that you will lessen the severity of water deficit during period 3. And with that, you will increase your berry size. That's what I understand.
Okay. All right, Thibaut, I am not seeing any more questions. And we are just a few minutes over time. Do you want to skip to that last slide here real quick? All right. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us again here today. If you have any questions about today's program or you want to get some more information, as always, feel free to contact us at info@vintagereport.com, and we'd be happy to assist you as needed. I do believe that this webinar will be automatically sent out to you momentarily, and you can even stay on this link, I believe, to rewatch the entire session. But thank you everyone for joining us. I do again apologize for those who had a bit of difficulty in finding the right URL, but I do hope that you can join us again on July 9th. And I also wanted to thank Thibaut and his team for putting together all this information and a lovely presentation. So thank you, Thibaut.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.